So my goal tonight is to introduce you to what it was like to live in Scott County 4,000 years ago, and how that they needed the exact same things that you need today, food, shelter, and water, and how they went about getting those things, and maybe interest you enough that you may even want to do a dig yourself sometime. I take my high school classes at the end of the presentation day. We're going to go up to the History Museum. You're going to see the prehistoric section. Almost everything in that was found by high school students here at Scott High. But before I do, I got to make sure I cover some rules and regs. Big South Fork was pretty trepidatious about me doing this tonight, and I'll be honest with you. There's two schools out there, and I'm not going to tell you how I feel either way. You probably figure out how I feel because I'm going to be teaching you how to do it. But they are people. I'm trying to not use adjectives, Ivory League, whatever you want to call, Ivory Towers, Ivy League type thinks that no one should be digging rock shelters unless you are a PhD in a college. And I've dealt with that many, many times. We've had some very interesting digs. We've uncovered a burial site, an infant child and its mother, prehistoric, probably 3,000 years old. It was an amazing find. There was a lot of strange things that went on, turf wars after we found that. We were turned in to the state archaeologist, and we were reported as if we'd done something wrong and illegal, and we hadn't. And we were given a letter of apology when it was all over. The chancellor at the University of Tennessee, named Jan Simic, he was a very famous archaeologist. He actually was one that discovered the cave paintings in France, and I think you guys may have heard about those. He's a big-time archaeologist. He was the president of the University of Tennessee, interim. He came to Scott High and met with me and my principal and brought a couple of PhDs with him, and they wanted us to map out all the rock shelters in Scott County, give it to the University of Tennessee Anthropology Department so they could dig them. And I thought, naively, that we'll get to dig too. And when we asked that question, absolutely not. That's not anything for high school students to be doing. Which we responded, well, we're not going to help you if you're not going to help us. I'm not going to give you where our stuff is, because here's what you need to know. It is legal. It is legal, L-E-G-A-L. It is legal to dig on private property. If it's your private property especially. If it's your neighbor's private property, you need to get permission. Because if you take something off the land, it's stealing just like you would if you took anything else off the land. So get permission if you dig on private property. It is illegal, and when the Big South Fork called and was concerned, they want to make sure I emphasize that it's illegal to dig in the Big South Fork. It's illegal to dig on any public property, not just the Big South Fork. You can't dig on state property. You can't dig on federal property. You can't even dig on municipality property. So it's not just the Big South Fork to be worried about. If you're on public property, it is illegal for you to dig. I don't care whose permission you have, and I don't care how stealthy and sneaky you think you are, there's a chance you'll get caught. Now, the Big South Fork claims they've got sensors in the ground that transmits back to their headquarters if someone's digging. I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I said, well, I know that I've always been told that. I really don't know if it's true or not. When I said that right away, I said, we're prosecuting somebody right now that was picked up digging in the Big South Fork through those sensors. So they're serious about it. So I'm telling you, whatever I teach you tonight, do not go on park property. But if you go on private property or your friend's private property, there's nothing illegal about what you're going to learn tonight, except for what I've got in red, NAGPRA. Okay. Now, I don't know if you got your phones, you want to write some of this stuff down. I should have had notebooks in case. I mean, this isn't a college class, and I'm not going to try to make it that formal. I mean, I teach this 90 minutes a day, 90 days a year, so I'm not going to be able to cover anything as far as what I cover in my classes. But NAGPRA stands for Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. Okay. And what it simply means is this. Let's give you an example of our dig, our high school dig. We were digging a rock shelter about 2 miles from here, less, mile and a half from here, and about 5 feet in the ground. The rock shelter, the dig was spread out. I had 30 students back then, and we were spread out all throughout this rock shelter. It was huge. Rock shelter here, rock shelter here. If you're not familiar with a rock shelter, I'm getting that. That's a cliff line or a cliff or a rock outpost, whatever you want to call it. Some people call them caves. They're not really caves, but you can go back under them. And this particular one was over the New River, and it was spread out throughout probably a 300 or 400 yard area, several rock shelters. I had 8 or 9 groups in there. So they're spread out everywhere. It's in late fall, and I'm on one end, and I hear the kids screaming. I really thought, honestly, somebody got bit by a snake, because that's always a worry of mine during that time period, being under rock shelters. You have to look out for that, because snakes tend to go that way, go that direction. So anyhow, I run up to the very first test site, which I'll pass out the graph of that later on tonight. And what they had was They went down in the ground about 5 feet, so they're chest high in the ground. And we dig in 1 meter squares, okay? So you just picture 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, kids standing in there. And in the face of their test units, what it's called, there's a skull sticking through about 4 feet down, okay? Well, I knew we had a prehistoric find right there, and we had Niagara situation. So we went ahead and excavated down to make sure that's what it was. And when we saw it was a skull, and it was in something called a flex burial. It's the way Native Americans prehistorically buried their dead. Joey, can I use you for example, buddy? Come on up here. I don't know how tall you are, Joey. How tall is Joey?
I think I'm 4'5".
He's 4'5". The average height of a prehistoric person in eastern woodlands, female, was 4'9". So you're not much taller than Joey here. For a male, was 5'1", okay? So in a flex burial, they would bury them usually in rock shelters, which we're going to be talking. You're going to go see one in the museum. We've got a fake one built, pretty realistic though. And they would bury them in a rock shelter, and they don't have metal tools. They're digging with stone or their hands, you got to remember. And if you've ever been in a rock shelter or a cliff, it's already rocky enough the way it is. It's a nightmare. So you're going to try to do what we call conservation of space. So Joey, come up here. And I want you to, on your side, lay down on your side for me. I'm going to put you in a flex burial. If you can see Joey, this is how we found the body. I've actually got a flex burial up in the museum that we did a model of a skeleton. And here's what they would have done. Now remember, Joey's only 3 or 4 inches shorter than a Native American female. But he's going to bend his knees up to his chest. Come on, loosen up, son. There you go. He's going to put this hand over this shoulder and this hand over this shoulder. We're going to tuck his head down right there. And here's what we got. We got this right here. And I'm guessing that's probably about 30 inches, okay? And if he would have been 4'9", like an average female, which this was, it might have been 32 inches. And they would bind them with sinew, which is their rope that they had, that was ligaments and tendons that they would strip and cut off extremely strong. They would bind them with that, tie them up so they wouldn't come unraveled, put them in the grave, 4 to 5 feet deep if they could, and then they would lay big stones on top of that, okay? Good job, Joey. You did a great job of a dead Indian. Let's give Joey a hand, Joey. Best dead Indian I've ever had. That's what we found. Now that's Niagara. The minute you find prehistoric or Native American bones, body parts, now what you've got, and you can rest assured that that's what it is. It's not somebody murdered somebody and buried them in the hole. You've got to report that to the county coroner immediately. Well, fortunately for us, Tom DeJean worked for the Park Service. He's an archaeologist, full-fledged, and he was working with us on this dig. So we called Tom. Tom came in. He was very excited. We brushed it down to the bones. There was an infant right beside of it, not this big, and we stopped right there. We didn't remove anything. We never removed any artifacts that were associated with the dig. You're not allowed to do that. But that's just for the dig area, okay? Now, 100 yards away at these other shelters on the same site, we're still okay. We reported that, did everything we were supposed to do, photographed it, did all that we were supposed to do, charted it, graphed it, covered it back up. That was the end of it. But what we wanted to do was have University of Tennessee come look at it, do something called an osteology report. They could look at the bones and determine cause of death, age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a guy named Murray Marks. He's an authority on it. UT has a very good anthropology department. Dr. Bass, you guys have heard of, right? Famous, the body farm. Murray Marks was extremely excited about it. He couldn't wait. And he told the director of the anthropology department what he was doing. And that's where everything went south. And he said, you're not going over there. Not only you're not going over there, I'm reporting them. I'm turning them in. Big investigation took place. And we were exonerated, and we were apologized to by University of Tennessee. I got the letter in my files because they wouldn't let it go. They just would not let it go. I'm telling you that's because this is serious stuff. So it's funny and it's not funny. There's some good old boys from Scott County who were digging in a rock shelter. I've got pictures in my file of this, and they found a body. They went home and they laid it out just like it would be. I mean, the skull and the spine and the ribs, the arms, and all that thing laid it out perfect. And they laid down next to it and had pictures taken of themselves with it. They were pretty proud of it. And they circulated those all over the place. I talked to the assistant district attorney. They were prosecuted for that. It is illegal to remove any human body part if you can verify that it is a Native American. Now, if it's not a Native American, it's not necessarily illegal. And there's a lot of battles in the archaeology world about this. I don't want to bore you with details. Matter of fact, I've got 2 bones back there I'm going to show you in a few minutes. I'm pretty sure are phalange, digit bones from humans that we uncovered. But there was no other bones associated with it, so we can't verify that. If we'd have found skulls and things like that, it'd been a different story. So we understand Niagara. If you're digging on private property, it doesn't matter where you are now. Everybody got that? Not just public property. You can't dig, period, on public property. So get that out of your mind. No digging on park property. But if you're digging private property and you come across a body, you have to stop immediately. Report it to the county coroner, who will in turn call an archaeologist who will come in and verify if it's prehistoric or not. And if it is, that's the end of your dig in that area right there. Okay, that makes sense, everybody? So that's kind of the rules and regs. Other than that, there are none. Don't sneak on somebody's property and dig. It's been done to me a couple of times. It bothered me. I took my first anthropology class to my property. I have a huge rock shell on my property. It's the size of this museum. I mean, or half maybe, but it's deep. It's as deep as this room. You can go back in, and we did our very first dig there and found all kinds of artifacts. So many that's what started the museum, and we hadn't even scratched the surface. So I decided we're going to quit digging, and my next semester class will come back, and we'll pick up there, and then the next year, and we had enough to do for years. In between those 2 semesters, I didn't know about it. I take my next semester down. A few months later, we walked down there. You had to have a rope to get to it. I mean, it's pretty rough where it's at, and it looked like somebody went in with a backhoe. There was trenches 4 feet deep, 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, where somebody in my class had went and told somebody, I know where, and they snuck in and they looted it like crazy. And I've got a graph of that dig I'll pass out here in a few minutes also. Okay, so now let's talk about what the word prehistoric means. The word prehistoric means before history. And what history means is when it's written down, okay? So when it comes to Scott County, not Israel, when it comes to Scott County, prehistoric is anything prior to the year 1600. Okay, prior to the year 1600. So prehistoric would be 1600 that way. That's prehistoric. If you go historic in this area here, East Tennessee, historic is 1600 that way. Okay, and the reason that is you guys probably remember DeSoto. You learned about an explorer named DeSoto in high school or whatever. That's when he explored the Mississippi River region area, and he came into these parts and started writing down what he was seeing amongst Native Americans. From that point on, everything is historic. We don't have to guess anymore. He's writing down what their lifestyle's like, okay? For the rest of us, before that, everything is prehistoric, prehistory. And the way we piece together how they lived is through artifacts. And when we find these artifacts, like I got a pretty cool one right here, come out of Scott County. It's just a little pot with a neat little handle on it, and that's all we've got of it. Okay, we glued this back together. And I can learn so many things by this pot. I can see how it was tempered, and I'll get into detail about that later on. I can tell that it has a handle, that it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,600 years old. Between 1,000 AD and 1,600 AD, somewhere in there. If the tempering is mussel shell, I'll talk about pottery in a few minutes. I can learn a lot just from looking at that pot, okay? So, what we've got to do is be detectives and piece together what in the world was going on prior to 1600, okay? To do that, we look at time periods, and over here are our time periods. I got a question mark here because I'm not going to lie to you. Biblically speaking, there's 2 or 3 theories out there. There's something called the gap theory about how old the earth could possibly be, and it may be millions of years old according to the Bible, according to the gap theory. I don't want to get into detail about that. So nobody really knows, but we do know that this Paleo period ended about 3000 BC, and here's why we know that. We can carbon date things, and carbon dating usually is accurate. It's not always accurate, but what it does is that there's a pine tree that lives in California called the bristlecone pine. It lives to be about 3,500 years old, okay? You can count the rings of that tree, literally, and see that the tree is 3,500 years old. And then what they do is they take the carbon-13 that has deteriorated from that tree once it's been cut down, and they can measure that. And if they know the tree is 3,500 years old, they can determine how much carbon would be in something that was once alive. You cannot carbon date this. And this, don't let people fool you on this stuff, because I don't want to, like I say, my goal here isn't to convince you of creation or not creation, but a lot of people, they carbon dated that arrowhead at 26 million years. That's a lie. Only thing you can carbon date, number one, is things that was alive at one time. It had to be alive, okay? Now, that means if I got a rabbit bone, the rabbit ate a plant, that plant has carbon-14 in it, therefore that rabbit will have a residual amount of carbon-14. The half-life of carbon-14, we know by measuring a bristlecone pine, is 3,500 years. I know I'm getting too technical here. I'm just trying to tell you that when you start dating things, and UT has dated some artifacts for us, you're going to see what we call a beehive pot up in the museum, one of the coolest artifacts you'll ever see. It's so rare. We've got it found right here in Scott County, and they were so interested in it, they could find carbon on it from where they cooked thousands of years ago. They scraped the carbon off, and they measured it to be 3,000 years old. This beehive pot that we have in the museum came right out of Scott County. So with that said, we got these time periods. Scott County has no natural lime. I don't know if you guys farm. Any of you guys farm? Even just grow a garden. Anybody grow hay? If you even grow hay, you know that every 5 or 6 years you need to lime your property if you want to get the most out of your crop production. And it's expensive, isn't it? Well, there's other places you don't have to worry about that. I mean, you go up in Kentucky, the bluegrass, the reason, I don't know if you guys realize, the reason racehorses were moved to Kentucky from Virginia was because the amount of lime deposit that was in the soil in the Lexington area. And the horses grew bigger and stronger, and their bones were stronger. And they just thrived on that grass. That's because there's so much lime in the ground there. Scott County, none, zero, okay? You don't start finding lime until you get north into Kentucky, west into Fentress County, east into Claiborne, maybe a little bit in the Campbell, and then Knoxville area, maybe Anderson County. But this region here has no natural occurring lime. And because it has no naturally occurring lime, it has no naturally occurring chert, Flint. You guys have heard of Flint, right? You all know what Flint is. Now this is what's cool about teaching us how to dig in a rock shelter, because Scott County doesn't have Flint. So if you find Flint in Scott County, what does that mean? Somebody brought it in. And we can look at Flint and tell where it came from, okay? I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but for example, this artifact right here was found in Scott County, okay? That is a corner, it's a side notched atlatl point, not an arrowhead. That's an atlatl point. And it's made out of something called chalcedony. If I hold it up to the light, see how you can almost see through that? Okay? That comes out of North Carolina, found in Scott County. How'd it get here? Somebody from North Carolina brought it here. And it was found deep in the ground. Okay? A friend of mine dug this up, okay? So chalcedony came from hundreds of miles away and brought right here in Scott County. And this guy right here is an expert on stones and minerals. There's something called Knox chert, which looks a lot like this tiny little one right here. It's real darkish gray, came out of the Knoxville area. Don't want to get into too much detail about that, but really what I'm talking about is the fact that if we go into a rock shelter and we find any chert at all, it's active. And I'll be telling you a little bit in a minute how to determine what rock shelter to even start to look in. So we've got the Paleo period, and the reason I was getting onto that lime thing, when you hear about Indian villages and Native American villages, that didn't happen in Scott County. We couldn't support a large population of people because agriculture wasn't advanced enough to do so with no lime in our ground. They could go other places and grow crops and thrive, but not here. So this area was a hunting ground. People would come as far as northern Kentucky, the Shawnee, to Scott County to hunt. And the Cherokee, this is much later. This is in the historic time, okay, after 1600. Cherokee would come from the North Carolina region and hunt and claim this area. The Creek would come, and they would all have trouble in this area right here. A lot of these skeletons that friends of mine have found, things like that, have holes in the head and things like that. And we'll get into more detail about warfare and why it started, hopefully if we have time. But when we start talking about these time periods, it's temporary here in Scott County. People move in and out, move through. Scott County, West Tennessee was settled way before Scott County was, okay? People just skipped right through because the soil was so poor, okay? So in the Paleo period, sometime 3000 BC. The Archaic period lasts from 3000 to 1000 BC. The Woodland period is 1000 to 1000 AD, and then the Mississippian period is 1600. What's that mean to you? Nothing. Here's what it means to me, though. When I find an artifact, I know this is Mississippian. I know it is. Here's why. Because in the Mississippian period, we can carbon date, if this had some carbon on it from them cooking on it, or if we found a bone in association with this. Let's say I found this 4 feet in the ground and there were bones with it. I could carbon date those bones, and I could surmise that, well, the bones are probably the same age as the pottery. And with that said, I could tell that this was whatever that carbon date was. So we know that we start seeing handles, we start seeing smooth sides. We're looking at the Mississippian period, much later stuff. If I showed you something like this, which looks like a big rock, oh, let me get that one right there.
Just curl it up her back.
Yo, they were worried about you. This piece of pottery here is crude. It's thick. It's nothing like this one. Okay, no handles on this right here. And the reason we know that because it's got texture to it. That's not for us to look at as a design. They weren't sitting around and designing this. They put texture on it on purpose so they could handle it. We'll get to more detail about that later. So the Archaic period is because of technology. As the technology advances and people get smarter and better at doing things, they have more time on their hands. So the Archaic people, this time period here, as they advanced and we start finding things like bow and arrows, like this one right here, very similar, and arrows just like this one, which is, my students made this, but they made it just like the Prehistorics would, out of river cane, which you guys stick your green beans with, okay? Actual flint arrowheads. They use turkey feathers with sinew wrappings on them to shoot. We go outside and shoot this, it'll go 120 yards, no trouble at all. It would kill you. It would kill you, I promise you. I had a student in the museum with this bow and one of these arrows goofing around, and he pulled it back and he let her fly. It went all the way through one of my display cases. He was working in the summer for me. It went through the display case, came out the other side. Now, that's plexiglass. It'd go through you, I promise you. And it cost him like $75 of his summer employment there. But it's serious stuff. A few years ago, we used to do a thing called Culture Night. We had kids from all over the country coming here to the museum. And there'd be about 100 to 120 kids. And I'd take them outside and I'd let them shoot bow and arrows. And a kid that never shot a bow in his life was standing at the end of the end zone. And usually they'll shoot 50 or 60 yards. It looks pretty cool. That thing's flying through the air, it's spinning. They feel like they're Tarzan or something. This kid pulled back and he let her fly, and it stuck in the peak of the field house, in the metal, went through the metal, okay? So I'm telling you that so you understand that these things it was so much better than throwing a spear at something, stabbing something, using an atlatl, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This was a huge advancement in technology, and when this came along, we call that the Woodland Period. They got smarter and smarter. And the smarter they got, the more time they had on their hands because they were hunting more efficiently, they started growing food, and then they started coming up with what I call idle time, where they're starting to do art stuff, starting to see totems. You guys know what totem poles, you start seeing those things. You start seeing things like this. Go back here and grab this. These are called effigies. This is made out of soapstone. The Archaic people, they're fighting for their lives. They're starving to death. They're trying to survive. Mississippian people, they've kind of figured it out by now, and they're doing stuff like this in their spare time, okay? All right, so that would be the time periods, okay? Now, I know everybody's wanting to look at this stuff, but one of the things I want to look at first is what's near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is prehistoric nutrition. And we'll hand this out. Sounds boring, I promise you it won't be. Promise you, this is going to be exciting. Because what I have is a menu here of what prehistoric people were eating. We know this because when I'm going to have a little exercise for you guys to do tonight. It's going to be fun. You're going to have bags you're going to go through. You're going to try to identify artifacts my classes have found. And they're going to be broken into 4 categories. Tools, weapons, pottery, food, and reduction fragments. And we find the food that they ate in digs still to this day.
That first time period, a lot of...
Paleo?
Yeah, the Flint actually a lot of rock or, it's a dark, it's a brownish color a lot, I think.
It determines where it came from, yeah. Yeah, it'll determine where it came from, what area.
So that must have been where they found it.
Okay, now you got this menu in front of you. Everybody got one? Anybody not get one? I've got plenty. Let's start off with deer. All right, most people, most of us, live on between a 2,000 and 3,000 calorie diet per day. No different than them back then. The only difference is this, think about this. These guys were hunters and gatherers. They did a lot more gathering than they did hunting. That's kind of a misnomer in history. They were finding their food on the ground way more than they were hunting it in the woods. Us guys that like to deer hunt and stuff like that, we like to pretend like we're, Native Americans and we could survive. Those guys were doing a lot more gathering than they were hunting, but they were burning calories and doing it whatever. We burn calories by going to Walmart, right? Buying it at the food aisle. So let's look at one item here starting off. Let's look at deer. And we're looking at a 2,000 to 3,000 calorie diet. Ben, do you want one of these? Okay. A 3.5 ounce slab of deer meat, which is the size of a small steak. If you went to any steakhouse, Applebee's, let's say, and you ordered their 3.5 ounce sirloin is what I get. That's what we're using as our guide right here, same size, okay? So a 3.5 ounce sirloin or 3.5 ounce slab of meat from a deer, it's 158 calories. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? 158 calories. A 2,000 calorie diet, that's not bad, okay? Now, if you go on down to total fat, here's where it gets very interesting with deer. Not very much fat in deer, not like cattle, not like beef. It is very, very, very lean, right? Deer meat's very lean. Now, we eat deer at my house all the time. I hunt, and my son hunts. I've even got my wife eating deer. My daughters love it. We make it, and I promise you, you wouldn't know if it was a steak or from a beef cow or deer. And we don't do anything special. We put a little butter on it, and salt. And that's really all we do. We sear it. We eat it medium rare. It probably makes some of you sick, but it has very little fat, which is a good thing. But you got to remember, fat's not a bad thing to prehistoric people because they're not going home every day and turning the thermostat up. They're fighting for warmth, and we'll talk about how they did that a little bit later. So I'm not going to look at anything else in that except down there iron. Look at iron. Now remember, let's. I'm going to jump to. Let's just give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's just jump to the next page. It's where it says mucket. See the muscle? Now this is I think very interesting. When you guys need calcium, you guys, what food group do you get your calcium from usually?
Oranges.
Where?
Oranges.
For calcium, I knew you would. Why did I invite you? Where do you get it from? Dairy, right? Dairy. Now think about prehistoric people. Were they milking cows? There were no cows. Were they milking goats? No, there were no goats. They weren't milking deer either. They weren't drinking milk, period. There was no milk. So where does a prehistoric person get their calcium from? They have to have it, just like you have to have it, right? So they got it from mussel, right here. Now that mussel shell, fresh water. You go down Big South Fork right now, don't pick one up, don't take it home, you're going to jail. But you can go to you go to New River and find these and you're okay. Matter of fact, you can take them, I've eaten them before. And it's about 3.5 ounces slab of steak right here. But you look at the amount of calcium that you're getting from mussel, not the shell. Well, no one's eating the shell, we're eating the meat on the inside, okay? You're getting almost 30% of your recommended daily amount of calcium through that. Has more calcium actually in a glass of milk. One mussel shell slab. But look at the iron, okay? Almost 100% of the iron you need, you got from mussel. And there was something else that they got their iron from. Anybody know? Because on all our digs, we will always find this in every dig. We may not find a lot of arrowheads or spear points or alligator points or knives or scrapers or whatever, but we always find this. And they're always broken open and crushed. What is it? Not walnuts, but we're going to get to that in a minute. It's bones. Okay? And when you guys get your packages and you're going to be going through, whenever you see a bone in there, we found that deep in the ground. We didn't just find that laying. It ain't somebody's dog dragging somebody's dead deer that they left laying around into a rock shelter. We're finding this 4 and 5 feet deep in the ground. And they're always split open and they're crushed open so they can eat the bone marrow. The bone marrow was high in iron. They used it for butter. That's what they would have used it for. So what I'm trying to show you is how that different foods, but we still had to have the same nutrients no matter what. While I'm on mussel, in case I forget, this was an unbelievable, when we would do digs with my classes, we would find things called mussel middens. And what a mussel midden was, they was always in the back of rock shelters. It would be these right here stacked one on top of another, sometimes 3 feet tall. Now we're digging 1,800 feet high usually, above rivers and streams, maybe 400 or 500 feet. They didn't swim up there, okay? They were carried up there by the dozens. They were gathered, they were brought up into these rock shelters, they were eaten, and when they didn't use this, because they used this, I'm gonna tell you what they used it for, they threw it into the back, and they would be mussel middens, garbage piles that we would find. Well, when we do our digs, I make my kids do what's called provenience. There's a chart, there's a graph, and they literally weigh every mussel shell they find. And what we're trying to look at is through levels of occupation, through time. The deeper you go, the older. What was the food they were eating? You know, where's all the muscle at? And where's all the bone? And where's this? And where's that? So it's nutritious, calcium and iron, all you need. And if you grind this stuff up, you mix it with clay and you can fire it. And it's one of the best temperings you can use, better than anything they use today. So when we start looking at pottery, and I can turn this thing sideways, there's a certain way the light will hit it and you'll see little white flakes specking there. We know that the Mississippian people, because this was that time period, it's got a handle, it's smooth, it's tempered with mussel shell ground up. That's what they were using for their tempering. I could hold this up and I'm not going to find mussel in there ground up. I'm going to find grit, rocks that have been beat up. And what the purpose of tempering is when you make a clay pot and you heat it, it keeps it from breaking and exploding. It holds it together. That's what they call tempering. So let's continue on with nutrition. There's a couple other things I want to point out and we'll move on. Now I'm going to be out of time before I know it. You'll see squirrel, that's interesting. Let's look at possum, good old possum, roadkill possum. You guys find that one. Good old possum. Everybody see it? 3.5 ounce slab possum, just like the deer. Now look at the calorie intake there. Way more. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing for prehistorics. They're trying to survive. They want calories. They're not worried about calories. They're moving. They're trying to stay warm. They're burning body heat in the wintertime because they don't have a house to get into. And remember, don't let anybody tell you there's teepees in Scott County. There really wasn't even wigwams. My students build their own wigwams. I don't know if you ever get on the Facebook site museum. I think there's some pictures of us building wigwams. Authentic. We use river cane. We bend it just like the prehistorics did, and we put grass around it, thatching. They would live in those temporarily, but they really lived in rock shelters temporarily. So they're not very warm. In the wintertime, they're burning a lot of body heat. So eating a slab of possum at 221 calories, 91 of which are fat, which is a good thing, was no big deal. But look at the iron there. Just eating possum meat, you're getting a lot of iron there. Okay, protein, 60% of the protein you need in one day can come from possum. You know, I don't like possums. They eat ticks. They don't carry rabies. They're one of the few mammals that we know of that rarely, if ever, are discovered with rabies. They're not bad animals at all, but I wouldn't want to eat one, I can tell you that. Everybody knows the difference between a black walnut and an English walnut. Black walnuts are what we get around here right off the tree. I want to talk a little bit about nuts because nuts was everything to prehistorics, everything they needed, okay? Now let me give you a scenario. We're going to picture Scott County 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. And I was in the Smoky Mountains this weekend. Me and my son went trout fishing up there, and we went up a trail forever, and the trees were humongous. And one thing we noticed, there was no light hitting the ground. Didn't matter what, it was a sunny day, No light was hitting the ground no matter what time of day it was. And because no light was hitting the ground, ferns were growing everywhere you walked. And we also noticed we didn't get a tick on us, oddly enough. And with no briars anywhere to be found. And that's similar to what Scott County would have looked like 3,000 years ago, but even more so. On this wall right here on the outside, I've got a tree that came out of New River Lumber Company. It was up in Smoky area, Norma. I think in this picture here, the tree is actually laying down, and I think there's a guy on a horse in this picture, and you can't even see the horse. You see the top of his ears. That tree is laying down this way. It's this tall. That's the kind of trees that were in Scott County. And when you have trees like that, the sunlight doesn't get in here very often at all. So you can walk through the woods unencumbered by all the things, cockleburs that we deal with, beggar lice, which are edible, by the way. I don't know if you get those little brown things that stick on your clothes. Eat those sometime. Just take one bite it. Spit the shell out, eat the inside. It tastes just like a peanut. It's edible. But nuts, they were everything to prehistorics, because let's look at the calorie intake of a black walnut. Common, I got some property, walnuts on it everywhere. 1 cup, look at the calories there. A Big Mac never come close to that, seriously. 1 Big Mac is not 607 calories. 1 cup of walnuts, healthy, 607 calories. Look at the fat calories though. 513 of them were fat, okay? That's amazing, but listen, they needed that. In the wintertime, they need that. And what's cool about gathering hickory nuts and walnuts and hazelnuts and all these nuts that we have in Scott County is that they don't run from you. You don't have to sneak up on them. They lay there for the taking. They're easy to pick up. And even women can do it. I was kidding. I said that on purpose, and here's why. This hunting and gathering society had division of labor that we still have with us today. And that's kind of fading into the gray right now. But there were certain jobs that women did because they nursed. Women weren't hunting. It had nothing to do with women's rights or anything like that. It was impractical. Imagine you guys that hunt, and women that hunt. Like Christy back there, she's a big hunter. But if you were nursing, how good, you think you would have killed that buckeye hanging in the museum during the festival if you've been nursing your child? 0 chance of that happening, right? That's why you weren't a hunter. That's why you were a gatherer. You could go out and gather nuts. You could go out and gather, let's turn to pokeberries. You all know what poke is, I know, don't you? Find that one in your list there. Guys, I have sheets and sheets. I just pulled 5 or 6 so you could see. Look at pokeberry shoots. Now, I should have brought some poke in. It's growing everywhere. You find pokes where the soil is terrible. Along the side of the roads, strip mines, strip jobs. But goodness gracious, you're talking about an unbelievable food. Look at the amount of vitamin C. Go down to vitamin C that you get out of 3.5 ounces of poke. Amazing, isn't it? There's not a glass of orange juice out there that can compare to that. And by the way, the orange juice you're drinking is not very good for you. I mean, you might as well drink you a Coke. It's got about the same amount of sugar content. But
What do you think they were preparing?
the poke, well, I'm going to tell you how we prepare it, and I'm wondering about how they prepare it, but I'm assuming it had to be similar, because if you eat raw poke, you're going to get sick. So they weren't getting sick. But I don't know if you guys know what poke is. I don't want to insult anybody here, but I'm from Cincinnati, and my mom would make me pick up poke right there in Cincinnati, and I'd bring it in, and she'd peel the outside layer off the stalk of it, cut it up, put it in cornmeal, fry it, put ketchup on it. Man, we're getting hungry right now thinking about it. I know, I loved it. It was like eating, I don't know what you described it, better than an onion ring to me. Okra, similar to okra. That's just nasty weed. It's a weed, poke. But the leaves, the berries are very poisonous. The leaf is salad. You can eat the leaf and it's good for you. So when they talk about poke shoots here, you're looking at 137% of the vitamin C you need in one day from 3 ounces of poke. Anybody can gather poke, okay? Look at the vitamin A content it's got. 99%, 3 ounces, you're getting all the vitamin A you need in one day. Okay, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but I just wanted to cover, that's for you to keep. I've got a book this thick of these. Anything you can think of that the prehistorics would ate, you can find out what the calorie content was. You can find out what the nutritional value was of all that stuff right there. All right, I got to move on, and I got to move on fast. All right, let's talk about digging, okay? And I want to take a break here in a few. This thing is over at 8:30, and we're already at 9 minutes till 8. So we're going to take a food break, and we're going to the museum, but I want to do an exercise first. So we're going to talk about digging real quick. I got it broken into 3 simple questions. Where are you going to dig, how are you going to dig, and what are you going to dig, okay? Rule number one, if you're going to dig, like I said, make sure it's private property, you have permission on your property, one. And let me say this, if you have a rock shelter on your property and you would like me to come out and look at it, I'm not trying to find a place to dig, don't worry, I don't have time. I can't dig my own property. I got a collection back there I told my son about, I said, hey, I got a rock shelter that I was digging out, you're old enough, he's 31 years old, you might be interested. He went up there and you're going to die when I show you what he found in just 3 digs. He never left the 15-foot area, it was amazing. With that said, if you know what you're looking for, it becomes a lot more easy, yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. I know, and I'm thinking about doing that. If we want to do a follow-up and maybe do some more things, we'll talk about that later before we leave. But the number one thing is it's got to face the east or southeast. So get this in your head. You know, if you have a phone, all you have to do is turn it on, and almost all phones come with this app. If it doesn't, it's free, and that is a compass. Okay. And all you do is stand there with your phone, point your compass. Right now, if there was a rock shelter behind me, I guarantee you there's stuff in it because I'm facing the east, southeast. Due east is right there, south is right there. Anywhere from where Ben's standing to that pencil sharpener, if that rock shelter is facing that direction, if the sun is rising into it and the sun is moving, which it doesn't move, but it looks like it's moving to the west, it will continually shine into that rock shelter. Hugely important because they're not flipping lanterns on and they're not turning the heater on. That sun gave them warmth in winter, it gave them light, it gave them everything they needed as far as that shelter goes, and we're going to talk even more about that. Where you dig depends on the sun also, not only the rock shelter, but where in the rock shelter. So rule number one, it needs to face the east or southeast. Anybody can figure that out. If it faces the north, it'll very seldom get sun all day long, maybe never. I have dug rock shelters that face north because they just look so promising and seldom find anything, seldom. So they need to face the east, south. There need to be a water source nearby. Now, the one I told you about that got looted had a natural spring running through it. It was really cool. It just bubbled out of it. And I could picture 3,000 years ago, groups of 12 to 14 prehistorics is what they would travel in those groups. They were nomadic. And they did what we call seasonal rounds, depending on the time of the year that the food that was available, like mass fall. When the nuts were falling in the big timbers like eastern Woodland, Scott County, they're going to be in our rock shelters gathering nuts. And there they are. And they've got this thing right here, a pestle. We found this in one of our digs. And I didn't bring them, there's a nutting stone, several, I didn't want to carry it down here. Big old stone, we call them lap stones. They're about that big, about that thick. And they actually drilled a hole in them using a pump drill. Getting way ahead of myself. Using a pump drill. This one right here starts a fire, and you can see today I was practicing. That's burnt because I had things smoking hot. But they take a pump drill like you see right here, and I'm not going to do much with it. But this would have a drill bit in it. Let me show you what a drill bit looked like prehistorically. A lot of people would find this right here. They'd say, oh, cool, I got an arrow point. Okay, it's got a little stem on it. It's elongated, pointy, sharp. It would have been sharp, especially when they use obsidian now in surgery, and that's another object that prehistorics used. It's sharper than razors. But this right here is a drill bit. Turn it upside down. You mount it inside this. You slice this right here. You mount it inside this. Now you got a drill bit. And what they would do with their drill, this is called a pump drill, they would put it in these rocks, and they just, you can sit here and do this all day long. It don't take any energy. And this is a counterbalance weight down at the bottom of it. I can say I can do it with one hand. I get tired, I can switch this hand. And if I really start pumping this thing hard, I'm gonna have it smoking in no time, literally. I promise you, we were doing it already today. That's why that's burnt right there. But if this had a drill bit in it, They would literally put this in a rock. This is made out of chert. Correct me if I'm not wrong, Frank, but chert's much harder than sandstone, right? So the sandstone lapstones, they would drill little holes in them and chip them out, break them out. And they would put a hole that this would fit into. Got that? You all follow me? I should have brought the lapstone down here. I just didn't want to carry that big sucker down here because we're going to be going up there anyway. Just picture a big old stone with a perfect bowl in it. And they would take these nuts I'm telling you about, and they would break them up in there, and then they would grind them up into a powder, and they would make flour, right? We grind wheat up to make flour. We grind corn up to make cornmeal. You can grind nuts up and get flour out of it to make nut cakes or whatever, breads, whatever you want to make out of it. They were doing that. And remember how many calories you're getting from 3.5 or 1 cup of nuts, and how much fat content you're getting also. So we're digging in rock shelters facing the east and southeast. We have to have a water source, either nearby, below. If you got a rock shelter in the middle of nowhere and there's no water nowhere near it, you're probably wasting your time because they're not going to be carrying water. They won't be able to get the water as quickly as they can, preferably right in the shelter. There's a spring running through the two I'm talking about right now, I'm thinking of, on my property, have water sources inside there. So that's where we're going to dig. How are we going to dig? All right. When my classes dig, we use trowels, little small trowels, like you'd call it a tucking trowel. If you're putting mortar in block, it's just small, pointy, about the size of my hand. I should have brought one. And we scrape. And we do it very meticulously. Because I'm trying to teach them anthropology. I've had 2 students go on to become anthropologists. We're trying to teach them anthropology, the right way to do it. I don't expect you guys to go out there with trowels and dig in 10 centimeter levels like we do, bag everything like we do. You know, we'll put it in a bag. And what I can do is I can look at this right here. It says test unit number 5, level 1, West Creek Rock Shelter. And it's got the kids' names on it. And here's what I would do. This was Rock Shelter 4. I pull this piece of paper out. You don't have to do this. This is what we do. And level 1, which is 10 centimeters, okay? 2.5 centimeters is 1 inch. So you're looking about 5 inches. We go down that much. At this level, they found mussel shell, and they weighed it to tell me how much it was. They found bone. They found 2 projectile points. They found some glass, because they're at level 1. You're going to find historic stuff mixed with prehistoric stuff. Does that make sense? You're going to find bullets. You're going to find shell casings. You're going to find metal. None of that stuff's prehistoric. But it makes sense that you're going to find it mixed with the Mississippian period, because this stuff's close to the top. This stuff is close to the bottom. This stuff in Scott County doesn't even exist. Very seldom, rarely, will you find anything from the Paleo period. I think it's interesting. Archaic's where you start finding it, okay? So when you're digging, you find that stuff, you're going down to different levels. I can pick this up, and I can reach in this bag, and everything that's on this list, there's a mussel shell, okay? Came out of the creek or river, brought back up to the rock shelter, cut open, the mussel was eat out of it, and this was thrown into the midden. They scrape hides with this, by the way. That one I showed you a while ago is a great hide scraper because it's sharp, it won't cut the hide, and when you're scraping the hide, my students tan all their own hides. I've got 2 of them up here, I'll show you in a minute. They tan their own hides. We use prehistoric methods. I will not let them use a knife. I give them a scraper, a stone scraper, or mussel shell. And when we bring these hides in, I go down to the meat packing place, one of the guys that processes deer, and they give them to me for free. And I bring them back 5 or 6 at a time. I break them up into groups. I flop them on the picnic tables out there, and I say, okay, your job is to get all the meat and fat off of this hide within the next day or 2. And then I give the students a choice. You can either brain tan that hide, or you can chemically tan it. It's your decision. The best hide tanner I ever had, the girl that did this one right here, was a girl. And she insisted on only using deer brains only. And when I say deer brains, the rule of thumb for tanning a hide out, let's say you kill a fox and you want to tan the hide out. The brain inside the fox is the amount of brain you need to tan the hide out. The brain inside the deer is the amount of brain. If you kill a squirrel, The brain inside the squirrels, and I've got some upstairs that students have actually taxidermed themselves. That's the amount of brain you need. So while I'm on this, and I know that we are really pushing time, I'm so sorry. I know there's going to be a lot of stuff. But here's what you do. You got this bloody hide. We take the mussel shell and we scrape the hide. And it's not like it's a bear. I mean, it was women's work in prehistoric time. Men would never do this. The women would be given the hide. They would scrape this off with stone tools and mussel shell. So they got it to where you could almost see the skin. It's got a purple look to it. You'd have to see it to understand it. It takes on a blue tint. And that's actually the hair on the back side of the skin that you're starting to see, which is good. Now you got all this off of it. You take the brains. What we do, we put the brains in a blender and we emulsify it with warm water. And then we rub it all over the hide. Just rub it in like tanning lotion, sun tanning lotion. And we cover every inch of it. And then we put it somewhere where dogs can't get to it, up on a metal roof so it will cure out. It'll take it 3 or 4 days. And when that happens, Joey, will you come up here just for a second and just have a seat right there? Because you're going to be handing this back and forth to me. You just sit down right there. When that happens, you get this hide right here. Now this one hasn't been broke yet. That one's been broken. This is hard. It's been tanned. But look at the hair falling over everywhere. It's been tanned out, but it's not been broke. And when you break the hide, immediately after tanning it, all that loose hair comes out when you break it. And the rest of it stays on. That's why when I peck on this, you'll see hair falling out because we never broke this hide. Ran out of time, whatever. What I mean by breaking the hide, that's the hard part. The easy part's tanning the hide out. The easy part is scraping the hide, even though it really isn't easy. But when you get to breaking the hide, you have got to get this soft. And this, my students did this one, and it's pretty soft. Okay, you can see what I'm talking about. And to do this, you would take that hide right there, and you would, that's what prehistorics do. They would get it against a tree like a saw. There'd be one person on one side of the hide, another person. They'd saw back and forth, back and forth. They would twist it up. They would roll it up. And then, these are women doing this, by the way, and then the women would chew on it. The saliva in your mouth will break down the enzymes that's in this hide and start getting it to be soft. But the bad part is, and we all know this, before they ever chewed on it, they used urine, to put on the hide, would break it down even more so. So they're chewing and peeing on at the same time, sitting around in a circle, gossiping, going on about what their husband's good for, not good for, and they're chewing on hides. And when they get done, and when you go to the museum in a few minutes, all the clothes that those Native Americans are wearing, those models, were made by my students, breaking their own hides, doing the whole thing, and they just drape over. They're really, really neat, okay? All right, I know I'm running out of time. All right, Joey, thank you. You can sit down. We're talking about you guys digging. All right, this is a sifter. Okay, Joey, get back up. This is a 2-man sifter. Joey be on that side, I'll be on this side. Here's what's happening. You're in that rock shelter and you're digging, and you're putting your dirt in a 5-gallon bucket. You bring the dirt over and you pour it into this sifter. Okay, now look at the grids. Let me have this, like, go, Joey. Look at the grids on there, okay? Pretty good size. If I was out west digging, these would be half or even a third that size. Beads, things like that would fall through this. We don't have any beads around here. We don't have anything ornate. We're about like we are now. We're just real, you know? So you're not gonna find a whole lot of that stuff. But you're gonna pour your 5-gallon bucket of dirt in here, and you're gonna start shaking it back and forth. And you're gonna take your hand, and you're gonna, let me turn sideways here, Joey. You're gonna shake it back and forth, and you're gonna take your hand, you're gonna push down the dirt like this, and you're pushing everything through except what you're trying to find. And here's what's gonna be in this box. Bunch of rocks that mean nothing. You're gonna pick through and you're gonna throw them over your shoulder. If you're not careful, you're gonna throw these over your shoulder, because these laying in there with a bunch of rocks look just like a rock. That's a cool piece of pottery right there. I mean, just think, that pottery right there is probably 2,000 to 3,000 years old. Somebody's sitting on my property, squatted down, making that first of all, and then using it to cook in, okay? And it's still with us 3,000 years later. That's pretty cool stuff, I think. That's kind of what got me into all this. So you're sitting there shaking it and you're picking through, getting out what you don't want, throwing it away, rubbing it all the time. And then you start looking at, and you're gonna find broken points. We're gonna be doing that exercise here in a minute. And you're gonna try to decide, what did that used to be? What was that? And I'm gonna try to help you with that too. All right, then I got another sifter up here for you guys that want to be serious, my son digs by himself. He tries to get me to go. I don't have time. And he's having a ball doing it. But these are for one man, okay? I've dug a 5-gallon bucket full of dirt. I pour it in here. Now I sit here and I do this. I'm sifting by myself. I don't need two people. It's going to roll back and forth for me, okay? You can hang it from a tree with that right there, hang the other side from a tree and do it by yourself, or you can make one of these. If you notice, these screens right here are smaller, okay? And you'll do the exact same thing. You'll be pushing it down with your hands, and when you're done, wow, there's an artifact. Now, done all that.
Hey, Gary, what's the nature of the soil in the rock house?
What is the nature of the soil?
Is it sandy?
Very, very sandy. That's a good question. Let me explain that. I'm glad you said that, Frank. It's very sandy, but here's the deal. When you're digging, here's the first of all, you found your rock shelter facing east and southeast. Second of all, you got a water source. Third of all, the best thing you could possibly find is chert, pieces of flint. If you find a piece of flint called reduction fragments, let me grab one here real quick so you'll know what we're talking about. Let me see here. It's nothing special unless you know what you're looking for, but you find a little piece like this right here, this little meaningless nothing piece of chert. This came off a bigger piece of chert. This is what we call a core piece. This is chert. You won't find this in Scott County naturally. You'll find it in your gravel because your gravel comes from Caravel. You'll find little pieces of this, but you're not going to find this in the ground at your property. If you do, that means you've got an active site, okay? So you can see this right here. There's been a piece flaked off of this. They take a billet, which is a deer antler or an elk antler, and we had a lot of elk in Scott County 3,000 years ago. We have found elk parts on our digs, and they hit it real hard with that billet, and it's called percussion chipping. They try to break it, and when they break it, they're flaking pieces off that they can use. And the garbage that gets set aside is called reduction fragments. Now this is Knox chert here. It just lays on the ground. It's garbage. It means nothing. When you're digging, you don't care about those reduction fragments. You're going to throw them away just like I do. But before you start digging, if you find these, it's everything because it tells you what? Somebody, they've been here. The prehistorics have been here because that chert reduction fragment, broken pieces, didn't get there by itself. So now you've got an active site, you know, you're digging. Frank asked the question, what's the soil like? What I've told my students is you're going to dig until you hit what's called yellow sandy loam. We all know what sand looks like. But in these rock shelters, the soil is not sandy. It is so fertile. My wife would kill for the dirt under these rock shelters because you're talking about thousands of years of leaves breaking down, stuff composting going on and on and on, and human occupation. So when you're digging, you'll even see the dirt changing colors. It'll go from like a dark, maybe to a lighter dark color, back to a dark, but then when you finally get to the bottom of that pit and you got yellow, sandy loam, you're finished. You might as well not dig anymore. All the way down to that point, it may be 5 feet deep, it may be 3 feet deep. When you hit sand, yellow dirt, there is no more digging, you're done. So in the meantime, all that black dirt, that rich dirt, usually has artifacts in it, in the rock shells that's facing it.